Most societies do seem to have institutions or rituals, if you like, labels to put on people whose behavior is abnormal in that society. Why is it that most societies seem to have the need for this? Is it fear? Is it protection of the established order of things? What is it that makes us, for example, label someone mentally ill?
The notion of abnormality, which you mentioned, is a fairly recent notion. The notion of mental illness is a fairly recent notion. Before that, the people who were seen as non-conforming were termed witches, or possessed by spirits or demons and so on. In a society in which people's work is geared to each other's work, reliability, a consistency of expectations is fairly important. If your life space, if doing your work depends upon what another person does very closely, then you're going to expect that he does what you expect him to do. And if he doesn't, you're going to complain. And you'll complain very bitterly to the extent that his activities or a lack of predictability interferes with yours. But at the bottom of this, it's basically fear that makes people insist upon conformity, even though there's a possibility that the nonconformity may be more adaptive than the institution that is being violated. So people are afraid to change. See, we're talking really about personal and social change. And there are some people, for very many reasons, who are never quite at home in a given institution or in a given society. They see better ways of doing it, or at least different ways of doing it, original, unique ways of doing it, spontaneous ways. There's a kind of germ of spontaneity in everybody. And if people are allowed enough space, they'll try out these new ways. And maybe 1,000 of them won't be adaptive, but one will. And the one will survive and be a stroke genius. So society pays a heavy price for conformity by stifling the unsung genius. And of course, many of us think that all of us are unsung geniuses if we just have enough room. If people give us enough room to try our wings, then we can come up with things that are beautiful and better and more efficient, more organized, and more conducive to life and to living and to human beings. But conformity, while it makes life predictable, it also makes it tedious and dull and unchanging and perhaps in the long run non-adaptive to human life. There are many of us who think that the form that modern society has taken is the one that is not conducive to human beings, that to live in a highly industrial, massified, tightly packed city, that machines can do this, but men can't. It's not healthy for human beings to live in a city which is competitive, which is run according to clock time rather than inner time, so that the clock is a machine after all. And to see people harnessed to machines, which is what modern men are. They're human beings, warm, living bodies, who are run by clocks. You have to rise at clock time and in order to integrate your work, coordinate your work with that of others. The only common denominator that people have in a city, an industrial city, is the clock. So they coordinate their activities through a clock, but a clock is a machine. And so it means that all these people here are harnessed to machines. And I think, for one, that is a very, very serious situation. It's inhuman and extremely detrimental to life itself.
The person himself who is told that he is mentally ill or is placed in an institution, what is his reaction likely to be?
There's a term that's used in penal institutions by criminal call it cooling the mark. When you're a con man and you con a victim, you not only want to steal from him, but you want to make him safe so that he doesn't complain to the police. And so you cool him. You give him a story which will make it unlikely that he will be further inconvenienced. Well, the whole ideology of mental illness is like cooling the mark. You explain to the person why you're doing all these things to him in a way that he won't complain. And if the person allows this explanation, he can integrate it into his own life and use it for explaining himself, you see. He can go back, for instance, and think, my God, now I understand why I did all these things all his life. You know, I was always antagonized by these teachers. I called them authoritarian bastards, but actually I was mentally ill, you see. It can cool him out so that he becomes a passive, loyal subject